Good morning. I've been asked by George to record the address, which I would have given at the Matin service yesterday morning had we not had the technical hitches with the streaming of the services. But before I give the address, I'm just going to reread the gospel for the day because my address was very much based on it. And so the gospel was Matthew chapter 10, verse 24. Jesus said, "A student is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for the student to be like his teacher, and the servant like his master. If the head of the house has been called Beelzebub, how much more the members of his household? So do not be afraid of them. There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. What I tell you in the dark, speak in the daylight. What is whispered in your ear, proclaim from the roofs. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both the soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from the will of your Father. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid, you are worth more than many sparrows. Whoever acknowledges me before men, I will also acknowledge him before my Father in heaven. But whoever disowns me before men, I will disown him before my Father in heaven. Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be members of his own household. Anyone who loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And anyone who does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." And so the gospel that I've just read seems to be rather strange in many ways for its forthright language and message. Throughout history, from the time of Jesus onwards, anyone who preaches the gospel and who thinks that they are always in for an enthusiastic reception needs to be realistic. They can expect no better reception than Jesus himself did, which, as we heard today, was very far from positive. But fear of opposition on a human level is no reason to give up, because behind the message there is a greater reality than the merely human reality. And that greater reality remains constant, no matter what happens on the human level. The divine level behind the message acts as a double encouragement to be faithful, because not only does it express itself in care for those who are faithful, it will bring retribution on those who deny it. And so, let us now have a look at the message contained in the reading. We heard that the message should be shouted from the rooftops, which is something that most of us will be pretty wary of doing unless we were very special people. I suppose that the nearest that we get to shouting from the rooftops today is to get something ad on Facebook or Twitter. Scandals have always caught the public's imagination, and the last thing that the victims want is for their actions to be shouted from the rooftops. And we have certainly heard that with the recent row over Cummings going to Durham during lockdown. There have been many other scandals that have shocked the nations, like the Profumo affair in the 1960s, which has recently been serialized on television, and Watergate in the 1970s. Since the 1970s, politicians have been seen in a differing light and have been regarded as fair game for all branches of the media, and never more so than now with the daily broadcasts over the COVID-19 virus. A recent trend in this country has been for the press to be far more intrusive into people's private lives, with the recent scandals over the false accusations of abuse by such people as Lord Bramall. Indeed, many people have skeletons in the cupboard, which they hope fervently will not be dug up at some later date, when the exposure will be at its most embarrassing. Nowadays, this often happens when politicians rise to high office, and there is nothing that the press likes more than to drag up some dirt on them. It sells newspapers. With this in mind, it must have been quite chilling for those who have things to hide when Jesus said, "There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known." He then went on to say, "What is whispered in your ear, proclaim from the roofs." Some might say that he was encouraging the spread of scandals, but I rather doubt it. But on a more serious level, there is a dark, brooding quality to all the words in today's gospel reading. Perhaps the shadow of the cross was already hanging over him, and although he probably was not aware of what was exactly going to happen to him, he certainly seems to have been aware that trouble was brewing. On the one hand, he seems to be warning his disciples about the terrors that are in store for them. And then on the other hand, he was bolstering their confidence with their courage. "Do not be afraid of those who kill the body," he said, "for they cannot kill the soul." And he then goes on to say that God cares about even the smallest sparrow, but he cares so much more about his children that he even knows how many hairs each one has on his or her head. And Jesus' use of the word sparrow is interesting, and it's probably because sparrows were the commonest wild birds in the Holy Land. In this country, they're also such a lovely bird. However, the life of a sparrow is short, and so to suggest that the creator of the universe cares more about each individual sparrow which falls dead was an astonishing claim to make. We then heard in our reading those terrible warnings, each one worse than the previous one. Jesus was clearly expecting big trouble, for he warned that he will deny before God anyone who denies him. He then went on to warn that he had not come to bring peace, but a sword, and that following him may well cause irreparable rifts between differing members of the family. This all sounds very different from those halcyon days of Advent, when we proclaim the coming of the Prince of Peace, and Christmas, when we worship the tiny baby in the crib, who was going to save the world. Yet the history of Christianity has been turbulent and bloody, especially all those religious wars and crusades. And today, such historical violence impairs the witness of the church. Families have indeed split over religion. We've had the Northern Ireland situation, which was fought ostensibly on religious grounds, although thankfully that area of land has returned to peaceful times. And we now have tensions between Muslims, especially the extremists and the fundamentalists, and have had so many dreadful atrocities and wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and now Syria in the name of religion. Indeed, religion is still one of those subjects, along with politics, which sensibly in some cases is not discussed around the dinner table. It certainly arouses the emotions. Jesus' warning then to his followers were to warn them that they will be persecuted for their faith. Roman emperors at that time were very powerful and feared and did take the lives of Christians who refused to deny their Christian faith. But all the emperor could do was to kill their body, as we heard Jesus predict. The emperor could not touch their immortal souls. If they escaped from the emperor by saying they did not believe in a loving God, then they would be liable to the judgment of God, who is much more powerful than the emperor. It was not the emperor they should fear, said Jesus, but God, who could judge them for being faithless. Yet the Christians who are faithful, for the Christians who are not faithful, it's not God the judge we are dealing with, but the loving God who cares even for the sparrows. We are unlikely to risk our lives for our faith these days, but if we admit to being Christians, we sometimes risk being mocked by people. And sometimes, if people break away from the faith of their families to be Christians, especially if they switched away from Islam to Christianity, they may well risk being cut off by their own relatives. We're very likely to have to endure physical suffering at some time in our lives, but the message today from Jesus is to be steadfast, hold on to our faith, proclaim it boldly, and Jesus will be with us in our suffering. And actually, there's a little rhyme which rather sums this all up, and I rather like it. I sing because I'm happy, I sing because I'm free, for his eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. It is particularly worth remembering this rhyme when we are feeling low and unloved after some disaster in our lives, when we are feeling vulnerable, as it reminds us that God does love us at all times. And so, isn't that a particularly lovely thought to end with on the second Sunday after Trinity? Amen.